A wealthy man known for his power and distance is brought to a full stop when a 9-year-old black girl calmly asks, "Can I go home with you?" In a single moment, outside a run-down community center, his past and present collide through the eyes of a child he's never met, but who somehow knows him. As their worlds intertwine on a quiet ride through forgotten streets, long-buried memories rise to the surface, forcing him to confront a life he's tried to leave behind. Who is this girl, and why does she carry pieces of a history he thought was gone forever? What will happen when a fleeting act of kindness from years ago returns in the form of a child looking for something more than just a ride home? Elias Monroe was too busy reading the contract on his tablet to notice the little girl at first. His thumb scrolled the screen with surgical precision, eyes fixed, jaw tight. He hated delays, hated when people couldn't do what they were paid to do, and today the contractors were late. The renovation of Brookhaven's Westgate Youth Center, a project under his foundation, had already gone over budget and over deadline. It was supposed to be a quick inspection, shake a few hands, get a few photos for PR, and leave. But here he was, leaning against the hood of a black luxury sedan parked at the edge of a crumbling sidewalk, waiting. "Excuse me, sir, can I go home with you?" The voice didn't come loud. It wasn't trembling either. It was quiet, direct. Elias didn't even look up at first, assuming it was someone talking nearby, probably one of the volunteers. So, this time it came closer. Elias lifted his head. She stood less than 5 feet from him, small, maybe 9 or 10. Skinny arms wrapped in an oversized denim jacket with a pink backpack held tight against her chest like armor. Her hair was tied back in puffs, uneven, like she'd done it herself. But it was her eyes that gave him pause. Steady, wide, and too old for her face. He blinked. "What did you say?" She didn't flinch. "I asked if I could go home with you." He laughed. An awkward, confused puff of breath, more a reflex than anything else. "That's a strange thing to say." The girl looked down. Her shoes were mismatched, one sneaker torn at the sole, the other held together with duct tape. She shrugged, like she was used to being misunderstood. Behind him, the car door opened and Ray stepped out, gray at the temples, broad-shouldered, and always watching. He walked around to Elias's side, catching the exchange. "Everything all right, sir?" Elias leaned slightly toward him. She asked if she could go home with me. Ray's eyes moved to the girl, his expression unreadable. Did she now? Elias turned back to her. "Where are your parents?" The girl said nothing. He sighed. "What's your name?" "Mary." "Mary what?" "Mary what?" "Lopez." He took another long look at her. The silence stretched between them like string pulled too tight. Ray shifted his weight. "You think she's been left behind?" Elias rubbed his temple. "Probably." "She doesn't look lost," Ray said quietly. "Looks like she knows exactly what she's doing." Elias nodded once. "Call the school or whatever staff's still here. Let them know she's out front." Ray hesitated before turning away. Mary walked over to the stone bench near the gate and sat down under the dim glow of a crooked lamppost. She didn't pout, didn't cry, just sat. Elias checked his watch. 10 minutes behind schedule. That's all this was, an interruption. He turned to get back in the car. "You ever sit on a curb like that?" Ray asked from the driver's side, voice low. "Waiting for someone who never came?" Elias didn't answer. Ray met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "I remember that story. St. Willem's, right? You told it at that gala. Sat on a front step for 3 hours 'cause the caseworker forgot to pick you up." Elias froze. The image surfaced instantly, uninvited. His 8-year-old self, knees bruised, sweater full of holes, pretending not to cry as the sun went down. watching every adult walk past like he didn't exist. The girl hadn't moved. He turned back. "Do you know your address?" Mary nodded. 214 Jasper Lane, near that church with the broken bell. He looked at Ray. "You know it?" "Yes." Ray opened the rear door. Elias didn't ask anything else, just jerked his head toward the car. "All right, let's go." Mary climbed in without a word. Settled into the seat with that same strange stillness. Not scared. Not giddy. Like she'd already decided this was happening, and now she was just riding it out. Elias got in beside her and tapped the tablet screen off. They pulled away from the curb. Mary stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass. She pulled a comic book from her bag and opened it carefully. The pages were crumpled, dog-eared. She traced the bubbles with her finger, mouthing the dialogue like a whispered ritual. Elias watched her in the mirror. "You're not afraid?" Mary didn't look up. "Bad people don't usually drive cars like this." Ray stifled a laugh. Elias didn't. "Children shouldn't know things like that," Elias muttered. The car turned onto a narrower street. Sidewalks cracked, houses shrinking the deeper they went, paint peeling, fences bent. A group of teenagers leaned against a corner store, eyes tracking the sedan with suspicion. "That's it," Mary said suddenly. "The green one, with the coat in the window." Before the car fully stopped, she jumped out. Elias followed slower, more hesitant. The porch groaned under his weight. An old woman sat in a sun-warped chair, wrapped in a thin shawl, coughing into her elbow. "Grandma, I'm home," Mary called. "This is the man who brought me back. Daddy didn't come again." The woman looked up. Her eyes were clouded, but her gaze sharpened when they landed on Elias. "You," she said, voice brittle. "You're the one from the photo." Elias blinked. "What?" Mary stepped aside, motioning him inside. The house was small but clean in a way that spoke of effort. A wall covered in photos, most in mismatched frames, a few warped by sun and time. One caught his eye. In it, he was crouching low, years younger, tying the shoelaces of a small black boy. It hit him like a sudden gust of cold air. "That boy," the woman said, coughing again. "That was my son, Malik, Mary's father." Elias moved closer, chest tightening. Said you gave him a book, told him he mattered. Said you knelt down and didn't talk down to him." She smiled faintly. "We kept that picture, 'cause he said it was the first time anyone made him feel seen." Mary stood in the doorway, watching Elias with something too complex for her age, hope and wariness and something else he couldn't name. Mary said, "Ha, always told me," Mary said. "If you ever get lost, look for the man from the picture. He'll remember." But he hadn't. Elias stared at the photo, his own smile frozen in time, unaware of what that moment had meant to someone else. "You need new shoes," he said quietly. Mary shook her head. "I need someone who stays." The wind outside made the window shudder. Somewhere in the house, something dripped. Maybe a sink or a leaky pipe. Elias didn't move. Mary waited. The silence stretched out, heavy, until Elias spoke again. "I'm not who I used to be." Mary looked down at her comic book. "Nobody is." He sat down, finally, on the edge of the old couch. Ray waited in the car, the engine still running, headlights casting long shadows on the fence outside. But Elias didn't get up, not yet. He just sat there, next to a child who shouldn't have had to ask strangers to take her home, and next to a picture of a promise he never realized he made. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like leaving. Elias didn't sleep that night. He tried, laid in bed, lights off, curtains pulled tight, but every time he closed his eyes, that little girl's voice cut through the dark. Not the words, those were simple enough, but the way she said them. Calm, certain, as if she knew exactly who he was, even though he had no idea who she was. And yet, when he pictured her face, it wasn't unfamiliar. Not entirely. By 6:00 a.m., he was already dressed. Slacks, black sweater, no tie. He stood by the window of his penthouse, overlooking the city skyline. A world made of glass and money, where silence cost extra, and no one knocked without permission. He hated the way it made him feel now. Ray arrived right on time, pulling the car around as usual. Elias stepped in, coffee in one hand, silence in the other. He didn't speak until they were already headed south. "You remember Malik Bennett?" Ray didn't answer right away, just drove, eyes on the road. "Malik," Ray finally said. "The kid from St. William's." "Yeah. Why?" Elias stared ahead. "His daughter is Mary." Ray exhaled hard through his nose. "Damn. I'm in the dream," she said. "Her mom's gone. Lives with her grandma now. Evelyn." "I remember Evelyn," Ray said. "Used to volunteer in the kitchen?" "Tough woman. Always kept extra sandwiches in her bag for the little ones." Elias nodded slowly. "She had a photo of me, from the old orphanage. Me tying Malik's shoes." Ray chuckled under his breath. "You and those shoelaces, that was your thing." Elias looked at him sideways. "No, seriously," Ray went on. "Every time a kid's laces came undone, you'd drop down like you were defusing a bomb. Real gentle. Used to say, if a kid trips over loose laces, maybe the problem isn't the shoes, it's that no one stopped to help." Elias didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like something he would have believed once. "I think I broke something," Elias muttered. Ray kept driving. "You didn't break it, you just forgot it was there." They reached Brookhaven in less than an hour. Elias didn't tell Ray where they were going, but Ray already knew. He turned toward the old part of town without asking. The neighborhood was just as Elias remembered. Maybe a little quieter. More rust on the fences. More paint chipping from the porches. But the bones were the same. Kids on bikes with flat tires. Old men on stoops, watching the world go nowhere. A slow, steady hum of life holding itself together. Maybe a healing spell as the boat left home. They had both felt that. The house was at the corner of Jasper Lane, just like Mary said. The green paint had faded to something closer to moss, and the porch sagged under its own weight. But it was alive, barely, maybe, but still standing. Elias stepped out and approached the door. Before he could knock, it opened. Mary was there. Same jacket. Same eyes. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked at him like she'd been expecting this exact moment. "I told Grandma you'd come back," she said. Evelyn appeared behind her, wrapped in a thicker shawl today, her face more sunken than he remembered. She leaned against the frame like her bones needed help remembering their job. "I thought I dreamed you," she said, but Mary said otherwise. "I wanted to talk," Elias said, "if that's all right." Evelyn nodded once and stepped aside. Mary didn't move from the doorway. She studied him for a second longer, then finally stepped aside too. The living room looked the same crooked picture frames, same worn carpet that felt thin beneath his feet. He could hear a space heater humming faintly in the back. Mary disappeared into the kitchen without a word. Elias sat on the couch. Evelyn remained standing. "She's different," Evelyn said. "She's smart," Elias replied. "She's lonely." He didn't argue. "She talks about her dad like he's still here, even though we both know he ain't." Elias looked up. "What happened to him?" Evelyn lowered herself slowly into a nearby armchair. "Malik wasn't made for this world. He was soft inside, but the world didn't care. Got mixed up with the wrong people. Tried to make things right 12 times, but life don't give out do-overs so easy. Last I heard, he was in Alabama. Then, nothing. That was 5 years ago. Does Mary know? He knows enough to pretend. Elias sat with that for a while. The hum of the heater grew louder in the silence. She said something last night, he said finally. I need someone who stays. Evelyn closed her eyes. That girl's heart is bigger than this whole house. Mary re-entered the room carrying 2 mugs of tea. She set one down in front of Elias and handed the other to her grandmother. Then she sat on the floor, cross-legged, near the heater. You always drink tea? Elias asked her. She shrugged. Coffee stunts your growth. He smiled. First time in a while. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, not needing to. The house held a kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just honest. Eventually, Elias leaned forward. I want to help, he said. Evelyn looked at him over her mug. Help how? I don't know yet. That's not a good start. I know, he said, but I mean it. Mary didn't look up from her book, but she was listening. You busy today? She asked. Elias blinked. Not really. Want to see my room? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Mary. But Elias stood. Sure. Mary led him down a narrow hallway with peeling wallpaper and sticky floorboards. Her room was small, barely big enough for a twin bed, a desk, and a milk crate full of books. On the wall, taped above the headboard, was a drawing, crayon on lined paper, a man in a suit, kneeling to tie a little boy's shoes. That's my dad, Mary said. And that's you. He stepped closer. The drawing was rough, childish, but he knew it was him. The glasses, the smile, the shoelaces. He said you changed his life. Elias swallowed. I didn't know that. Mary looked at the floor. He said you didn't stay, but he forgave you. Elias sat on the edge of the bed. He shouldn't have had to. For a moment the room was silent again. Then Mary climbed up beside him and handed him a comic book. You can borrow it, but you gotta give it back. He took it, flipping through the wrinkled pages. Deal. Outside the window, the wind knocked gently against the glass. The city buzzed beyond the hills, oblivious. Somewhere in his inbox, a dozen emails waited, unanswered. But Elias stayed. Not because he had to, not because it looked good. Because for the first time in years, he wanted to. The next few days passed like a rhythm Elias didn't realize he knew how to follow. Every morning, his driver, Ray, would pick him up from the glass and steel tower in the heart of downtown, where polished doors opened to boardrooms and handshakes. But instead of heading to meetings or investor lunches, they'd take that quiet turn toward Brookhaven, past the last rows of manicured hedges, past the brick mansions with their iron gates, and into streets where the sidewalks buckled like tired knees and the street lamps leaned with rust. The first day he came back, he brought groceries. Nothing fancy, just eggs, bread, milk, a rotisserie chicken he picked up from a corner deli that smelled like it hadn't changed owners in 30 years. Mary met him at the door. She didn't smile, didn't run, just took the bag from his hand and nodded like a business deal had been made. Grandma says thanks, she muttered, already halfway to the kitchen. Inside, Evelyn was propped up in her chair by the window, her shawl draped over her shoulders like a second skin. She looked at him through eyes that had seen too many promises broken to get excited about new ones. You're back, she said, like it was both a statement and a test. Elias nodded. I said I would be. She looked away, toward the street, where 2 boys rode the same busted-up bicycle in a shaky loop. A lot of people say a lot of things. He didn't argue. Every visit after that came with something else. A new space heater, a bag of groceries, a few paperback books Mary hadn't read yet. She devoured them, one after another, always with a pencil in her hand, underlining words and scribbling notes in the margins like she was preparing for a test no one else knew about. She didn't talk much when she read, but she liked when he stayed in the room. She'd sit cross-legged on the floor, elbows on her knees, eyes darting from word to word, while Elias sat on the old couch, thumbing through the comics she'd loaned him. She never asked him about his job, never asked what kind of man drove around in a car that quiet or wore watches that cost more than someone's rent. She didn't seem interested in what he had, just whether or not he'd be there again tomorrow. Evelyn watched it all unfold with a kind of caution Elias understood. Every time he lingered too long or came back too soon, her eyes would follow him like she was trying to measure how deep this went, like she was counting the days before he'd disappear again. On the fourth visit, Elias offered to fix the broken railing on the porch. Ray handed him a toolbox without saying a word, just patting his shoulder like a father seeing his son try something useful for once. Elias hadn't used a wrench in years. He stripped one of the screws, cursed under his breath, and caught Mary watching him from the steps with her comic book upside down. "You know you're doing that wrong, right?" she said. He glanced at her. "Oh, you're an expert now?" She shrugged. "Grandma fixes stuff all the time. She showed me how." He handed her the screwdriver. "Then be my guest." She walked over, flipped the tool in her hand like a pro, and knelt beside the wobbly rail. In 2 minutes, she had the screw tightened, the post straight. "Maybe I'll hire you," Elias said. She tilted her head. "I don't work for money. I work for Oreos." He laughed. "Consider it done." They sat side by side on the porch after that, a small plate of cookies between them. The silence came easily. Elias had never realized how loud his life had been until now. Phones buzzing, meetings layered on top of meetings, people talking without ever saying anything real. Here, a glance meant something. A quiet nod was enough. At one point, Mary looked up from her snack and asked, "What was my dad like when you knew him?" Elias paused. The question caught him off guard, not because he didn't expect it, but because he realized he didn't know. "I only met him once," he said, "at the orphanage. He was quiet, nervous. His shoelaces were always undone." Mary cracked a smile. "I get that from him." Elias studied her face. "You get a lot more than that." She didn't say anything else, just went back to her Oreos. Later that day, he walked into her room with a new pair of sneakers. Nothing flashy, just clean, sturdy, and her size. He didn't make a speech, didn't explain why, just left them by her bed and stepped out. The next day, she was wearing them when he arrived. No mention of it, no thank you, just worn laces tied tight. By the end of the week, Elias found himself asking Ray to take longer routes back downtown. He didn't want to go home, didn't want to return to the silent elevator rides or the curated art on his walls. His penthouse, once a symbol of everything he'd worked for, now felt like a museum exhibit of a life lived behind glass. One night, as they pulled away from Mary's house, Elias stared out the window, quiet. Ray finally broke the silence. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Elias didn't turn. "That depends." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You gonna keep showing up until you fix every broken thing in that house?" Elias gave a soft laugh. "I'm not sure I can fix anything." Ray grinned. "You're fixing something, all right. Just maybe not what you thought." The next morning, Elias sat in his office, the tablet untouched on his desk. He stared out the window, the city humming beneath him. He hadn't told anyone at the company about where he'd been. Not his assistant, not the board. He didn't need to. The world would keep spinning without his signature on a few memos. Let it spin. He opened his drawer and pulled out an old manila folder, something he hadn't looked at in years. Inside was a faded pamphlet from St. William's Home for Children, a grainy photo of a playground, a smiling boy, himself, somewhere in the background, pretending to know what he was doing. He flipped it over. A handwritten note in pencil from a kid named Malik. "Thanks for tying my shoes. Nobody ever did that before." Elias closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Something deep inside him stirred. He knew where he'd be again tomorrow. Elias didn't expect to be nervous, but something about holding a tray of lemon-pepper chicken and green beans wrapped in foil made his palms sweat. He'd never brought hot food to a house that wasn't his. Not like this. His hands were used to conference room doors and cold espresso cups, not casserole dishes warmed in his luxury kitchen by a housekeeper he hadn't seen in weeks. Still, there he was, on a front porch where the paint curled back like tired skin, porch swing creaking in the wind. Same bent mailbox, same doormat with the faded "welcome" barely visible through the dirt. Mary opened the door this time. She wore the new sneakers again. The laces were double-knotted and too tight, like she didn't want to risk them ever coming undone. Her socks had tiny stars on them. One was pulled higher than the other. "You brought food?" she asked, eyeing the tray like it might be a trick. "Thought you might be tired of cereal." She stepped aside without a word and motioned him in like she was letting a plumber in to fix a leak. The living room was warmer than usual. The heater buzzed near Evelyn's feet. A crocheted blanket covered her lap, and she was flipping through a weathered photo album. Her glasses perched low on her nose, and she didn't look up when Elias entered. "I didn't cook this," he said, setting the tray on the side table. "Don't want to take credit I didn't earn." Evelyn let out a short grunt. "That supposed to impress me?" "No," Elias said, smiling, "but I thought you should know." Mary plopped down on the floor, legs crossed, book already in hand. As if his presence no longer required acknowledgement, as if he'd become furniture. He didn't mind. He eased himself into the chair across from Evelyn and watched her turn another page. Her hands were thin now, paper-like, but steady. "Looking at anything good?" She flipped another page. "Old things." He waited, no need to force it. Silence, he'd learned, did more talking than words ever could in that house. She stopped, turning pages, tapped one gently with her finger. "You remember this?" Elias leaned forward. The photograph was small and a little warped at the edges, but he recognized it instantly. A younger version of himself, maybe 20 or 21, crouching down to tie the shoes of a boy with wide eyes and a nervous posture. He hadn't seen the photo since that charity event at St. William's. "Malik," Elias said softly. Ellen nodded. He'd never had shoes that fit before that day. Always wore his cousins, too tight or too loose, but that pair you brought? They were his. "I didn't think it meant that much," Elias said. Evelyn looked at him now, square in the eyes. "That's the problem with people like you. You do things thinking they're small, but for folks like us, the small things stack up. They become everything." He nodded, slowly. A bead of shame curled inside his chest. "He came home that day," she continued, her voice rougher now, "telling everybody in the shelter he met a man who made him feel like he mattered. Said you looked him in the eye. Said you listened." Elias didn't know what to say. "You know how rare that is?" she asked. "For a black boy in this world to be seen without suspicion or pity?" Her eyes glistened, but didn't break. Mary didn't speak, but her ears were wide open. Elias could tell by the way she held her book without turning the page. "I don't know why you came back," Evelyn said. "And I don't know how long you plan to stay, but just know this. What you started back then, it didn't end." Elias felt like a child again, not because she'd scolded him, but because somewhere, deep down, he'd been waiting for someone to remind him what kind of man he used to be. He leaned back, eyes scanning the walls now. That picture wasn't the only one. There were others. Evelyn holding a young Malik outside a brick building with broken windows. Malik at some science fair, grinning with a ribbon pinned to his shirt. Then a gap. Years missing. A dark span of time where no pictures had been taken. Or maybe none worth framing. Mary stood suddenly, "Come here," she said, walking toward the hallway. Elias followed, unsure where this was going. She pushed open her bedroom door, walked straight to her nightstand and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was yellowed and soft at the edges. She handed it to him. He opened it carefully. A hand-drawn sketch, crayon and pencil, a man in a suit, kneeling, a little boy looking down, 1 foot out, the shoelace being tied. "My dad drew that," Mary said, "a week before he left." Elias stared at the line, simple but full of detail. The face wasn't precise, but the gesture, the crouch, the hand reaching out, was unmistakable. "Used to say," she added, "that was the first time he thought maybe he didn't have to disappear." Elias swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Feeling he had mattered," she said. "Because of you." He wanted to say he didn't remember doing it, that it was just a moment, that he never expected it to echo this far down the years. But none of that mattered now. Mary sat on her bed and looked at him, calm as ever. "Heft left anyway," she said, "but he never stopped talking about that day. About you." Elias folded the drawing gently and handed it back. "I'm sorry." Mary shook her head. "You're here now." Back in the living room, Evelyn had fallen asleep in her chair. The photo album rested in her lap, open to the picture of Elias and Malik. A quiet snore escaped her lips every few seconds. Elias didn't wake her. He just sat nearby, sipping the tea Mary had made. Too much sugar, not enough steeping time. But he drank every drop. By sunset, the house smelled like lemon and dust. Elias helped Mary clean up the dishes without saying much, the rhythm between them no longer awkward, just quiet. As he stood on the porch ready to leave, Mary walked out behind him. She looked up at the sky. "It's going to rain soon." "How can you tell?" She shrugged. "The air smells different, and the trees move slower." Elias smiled. "You might be right." She looked at him then. "You coming back tomorrow?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I will." She nodded once, like that was the answer she expected. As the car pulled away, Elias looked back at the house. The porch light flickered, struggling against the twilight, but it stayed on, just enough to be seen, just enough to come home to. The call came just after midnight. Ray answered first. Elias was half asleep, the glow from his phone lighting up the ceiling as he listened to the voice on speaker. Mary's voice, soft, shaky. She didn't cry, but the quiet panic in her words felt louder than any scream. "It's Grandma," she said. "She fell." The city outside Elias' window didn't stop humming, didn't know or care. But everything in him went still. They were there in 15 minutes. Elias in sweats and an old hoodie he hadn't worn since college, Ray driving like every streetlight owed him passage. The neighborhood was darker than usual. The sky heavy, clouds sagging low as if they might break open. Elias barely remembered getting out of the car. He just remembered the porch light wasn't on. The front door was cracked open. Mary sat on the floor inside, legs folded beneath her like she hadn't moved since the fall. Evelyn lay beside the couch, a blanket draped over her. Her eyes were closed, lips pressed tight in pain, one hand holding her ribs. "I tried calling 911, Mary said, "but I didn't know how long they'd take. I didn't know if it was serious. I didn't know if—" She stopped herself. Elias knelt beside Evelyn. "Miss Bennett, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes slowly. "Banged up," she whispered. "Slipped on that damn rug. You hit your side." She nodded. Ray was already dialing. "I'll get paramedics on the line, just in case." Elias stayed with Evelyn, steadying her breath with his own. She gripped his wrist hard, eyes sharper now. "Don't let them take her. If something happens to me, don't let them take her." You mean child services? She nodded, face pale. I won't, he said, without even thinking. Mary sat frozen on the floor. One hand clutched the comic book she'd brought with her from her room, the same one she always reread when she didn't know what else to do. The ambulance came quicker than Elias expected. The sirens broke the still of the street, but no neighbors came out. No one peeked from curtains. The world stayed quiet, as if this house lived on a separate rhythm. They took Evelyn gently, lifting her onto the stretcher, checking her vitals. Mary stood at the top of the porch steps, hugging herself with both arms, her eyes fixed on her grandmother's hands until they disappeared into the ambulance. The paramedic turned to Elias. She'll be all right, probably bruised ribs. We'll run tests, keep her overnight. Mary didn't move. Elias looked down at her. I'll stay with you, however long you need. She didn't respond, but she didn't turn him away either. That night the house was too quiet. The heater made small, popping sounds. The clock in the kitchen ticked loud enough to notice. Elias sat on the couch while Mary curled up in her grandmother's chair, wrapped in the old blanket, her eyes half closed but never fully asleep. He wanted to tell her it was going to be okay, but those words fell hollow, too easy. Instead, he stayed awake, all night, listening to the air creak around them, the fragile breathing from the corner, and the city far beyond that had never noticed this home or its people. In the morning, he made pancakes. Burnt the first batch. Mary didn't say anything, just chewed slowly and stared out the window. By noon, Evelyn called from the hospital. Looks worse than it is, she grumbled. They got me on enough painkillers to knock out a horse. Elias laughed. You'll be okay? Yeah, but she won't. Not if she thinks I'm leaving her. She's strong, Elias said. She's tired, Evelyn replied. She acts grown, but she's still a little girl. Her dad left, her mom died. I'm the last one. There was a long pause. Then her voice came back quieter. She needs something steadier. Elias didn't speak. You thinking about it, aren't you? I don't know, he admitted. You do. Mary walked in, hearing just the tail end of the call. She didn't ask questions. She sat beside him and picked up a pencil from the table, doodling circles on the back of a paper bag. That evening, Elias took her for a walk. The neighborhood looked softer at dusk, less broken, more patient. Mary kicked a rock along the sidewalk, her steps slow, uneven. Did you ever run away? She asked suddenly. Elias looked at her. Once, when I was about your age. Why? I thought no one would notice if I disappeared. Did they? He paused. Eventually. She nodded, like that made sense. They passed a mural on the side of an old liquor store. Faded blues and yellows, hands reaching upward, stars circling their fingertips. Someone had tagged over it, but the image still held. Mary stopped walking. Do you think people can change? Yeah, Elias said. But it's hard. Did you? He hesitated. I think I forgot who I was. Then I remembered. She didn't say anything else. That night, Elias went home to his penthouse. But he didn't stay. The silence there wasn't the kind you could sit with. It was empty, sterile. The art on the walls didn't mean anything. The wine in the cabinet hadn't been touched in weeks. He packed a bag, just a small one. When he showed up the next morning, Mary was already waiting on the porch, jacket zipped, shoes tied. You're late, she said. I'm 2 minutes early. She handed him a list. Groceries, essentials, shampoo, peanut butter, toothpaste, her favorite cereal. No Oreos, he asked, teasing. I'm watching my sugar. He laughed. At the hospital, Evelyn looked better. Color back in her cheeks, sarcasm back in her tone. When Elias walked in with Mary, the old woman gave him a long, tired smile. "I guess you passed the test." "I didn't know I was taking one." "You always are." He helped her sit up straighter in bed. Mary climbed into the chair beside her and handed her the sketchbook she'd drawn in while waiting. Elias looked around the room. Plain white walls, flickering TV mounted in the corner, a dry erase board with Dr. Patel scribbled in marker. But it felt warmer somehow, like something important had happened here, something not entirely visible. As they drove home that afternoon, Mary sat in the back seat, flipping through her sketchbook. She'd drawn the mural, the hands, the stars. This time, she added a tiny figure at the bottom. Man in a hoodie, reaching up. She didn't say it was him. He didn't have to. Elias looked at her in the mirror. She met his eyes for half a second, then went back to drawing. He didn't know what he was becoming. Not a father, not exactly, not a replacement, but something steady. And for the first time, that felt enough. The day Evelyn came home from the hospital, the sun finally broke through after a week of clouds. The light felt different. Not just brighter, but softer somehow. It pooled across the front porch, warming the wood beneath the rocking chair, lighting up the window panes that hadn't been cleaned in years. Mary stood on the lawn in mismatched gloves, raking up dead leaves, with half a smile on her face. Elias watched from the sidewalk, a bag of groceries in one hand and a small orchid in the other. "Thought we could try something alive for once," he said, raising the pot. Mary dropped the rake and jogged over. "Grandma likes purple." That's what I remembered. Inside, Evelyn was already rearranging the cushions on the couch, refusing to sit still. Her ribs ached when she moved, but she wouldn't let Elias help her. Not with that. She said some pain was earned. Mary brought her a cup of tea and then hovered near the hallway, watching Elias with a quiet urgency. He understood what she was waiting for. After dinner, Elias cleared the plates. No one asked him to. He just did it, sleeves rolled up, humming to himself. The sink was shallow and old and the faucet leaked, but somehow washing dishes in that cramped kitchen felt more grounding than anything he'd done in his office tower. When he came back into the living room, Evelyn was asleep again, and Mary was sitting on the floor flipping through her sketchbook. The TV was on low, playing a rerun of some old detective show. Elias sat on the couch and leaned back, one hand resting near his chest, the other behind his head. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" Mary asked, eyes still on her drawings. "All the time. More secure job. I mean, like, really next, not tomorrow next." Elias looked at her. "Yeah. Do you ever want to go back to before you came here?" He considered the question. "I used to think the life I built was the prize, the penthouse, the suits, the meetings. But none of it ever asked me who I really was. It just liked what I could give it." Mary nodded slowly. "Grandma says money doesn't change people. It just makes them more of what they already were." He's right. A pause stretched between them. Then she asked, "What were you before all that?" Elias leaned forward, just a boy trying not to disappear. Mary drew a tiny house in the corner of her paper. "I used to feel like I was waiting for something, like someone was supposed to come back for me. I think I was supposed to be that someone. Even if you forgot?" He hesitated, then answered, "Especially if I forgot." She looked up then, really looked at him. "I don't want you to feel sorry for me," she said. "I don't. I want you to stay because you want to." "I do." It was the first time she smiled with her whole face. Just a flicker, just a second, but it was real. That weekend, Elias called in favors. Quietly. He hired a plumber to fix the leak in the kitchen, an electrician to replace the brittle wiring in the back room. Nothing extravagant, just safe, sturdy things. A local gardener helped patch up the lawn, and Mary got her own bed, brand new, no springs poking through. Ray pulled him aside one afternoon. "You know this doesn't stop with house repairs, right?" "I know. You ready for that?" Elias glanced at the porch, where Mary was drawing again, this time with her feet propped up on a flower pot. "I don't think I've ever been ready for anything that mattered." Ray grinned and patted his back. "Good. That means you're finally getting it." Weeks passed. The house changed shapes, little by little, and so did they. Evelyn took fewer pills, walked farther each day, even cooked on Sundays, though she made Elias chop the onions because, as she claimed, rich folks need humbling. Mary went back to school with new supplies and fewer walls. Her teachers noticed she raised her hand more often, started finishing her lunch, even stayed after class once to help pick up crayons without being asked. Elias started carrying a photo in his wallet again. Not a professional headshot, not a company logo. It was the picture of him and Malik, kneeling down, shoelaces in hand. He showed it to Mary one night after dinner. "Deal with it." "Wasn't just your father," Elias said. "He was part of my beginning. Maybe the best part." Mary didn't cry. She just nodded, tracing the lines of the picture with her thumb. "I think he'd be proud of you," Elias added. She looked up at him. "I think he'd be proud of you, too." On the first day of spring, Elias took Mary to the park near the lake. It wasn't far, but it felt like a new world. People flew kites, threw frisbees, laughed in the open air like it was the first time they remembered how. Mary ran ahead toward the swings. Elias sat on a bench nearby, watching her feet push off the ground, higher with every kick. Ray sat beside him, sipping coffee. "You know you're different now." "Feels like it." "He's different, too." "She was always different," Elias said. "The world just stopped long enough to notice." They sat in silence for a while. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a guardianship application. Not a full adoption. Evelyn was still here, still her heart, but something official, something permanent. "I'm filing this next week," he said, with her blessing. Ray looked over at him, then at Mary, who was now laughing with two other kids, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "You sure?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I'm sure." As the sun dipped lower, casting gold over the lake, Mary ran back toward them, cheeks flushed, breath coming fast. "You see that?" she asked, beaming. "I went higher than all of them." "You did," Elias said, rising to meet her. "You really did." She reached for his hand without thinking. He took it without pause. And as they walked home together, their shadows stretched out ahead of them, two shapes, one tall, one small, merged by the light, heading in the same direction. For the first time in a long time, Elias Monroe wasn't running from the past. He was walking towards something better. And Mary Lopez wasn't waiting anymore. She was home.